Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 10. Mark has Jesus. Well, Jesus is traveling south toward Jerusalem. We don't exactly know where he is, but some Pharisees come up to Jesus and ask him a question about divorce. And in all probability, they're asking this question to try to trap him. Because Jesus had talked about divorce earlier in, for example, Matthew chapter 5, earlier in his ministry, and they were probably trying to get him to say something that would contradict what he had said earlier. During the time of Jesus, there was a great debate concerning divorce, when you could and couldn't divorce. And the debate really centered around Moses' instruction on divorce in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. Moses said you could divorce your wife for indecency. Well, the question was, what does that mean? What is indecent? And there was two schools of thought. There was Shammai, who was a rabbi, lived about 100 years earlier, who interpreted that word indecent to mean adultery or fornication. About 50, 60 years earlier, there was a rabbi by the name of Hillel who interpreted that indecent to mean any way your wife displeased you. She could be a bad cook, and that would give you grounds to divorce your wife. Jesus held with the stricter interpretation of Hillel and said that you cannot divorce your wife except for the circumstances of adultery or fornication. Now, Jesus went a little further this time. He added something else. He said, if you get a divorce and marry another person, that's adultery. If you see this other woman that you want to marry, so you get rid of your wife so you can marry this woman over here, that's adultery. Just because you have a piece of paper doesn't make it okay. In verse 13, we have another instance where people are bringing their children, parents are bringing their children to be blessed by Jesus. And the disciples try to stop that. Jesus rebukes them. And then Jesus says, again, that there are certain aspects of the character of children that you need to emulate if you want to enter God's kingdom, if you want to participate in it. And one of those, for example, is a characteristic of trust. We need to trust our Father in heaven just as children trust their parents. The next section in chapter 10 deals with a rich young man. And it's interesting that this story is told in all of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We're told that Jesus had great compassion for this young man, that he loved this guy because he saw that there was a hunger in this man for God. But Jesus also knew that having position, possession, prestige, and honor was the most important thing in this young man's life. And Jesus had taught you can't serve two masters. You can't serve God and mammon. Matthew 6:24. So Jesus challenged him with where his heart was at. And it tells us after that challenge, this young man walked away sad. He walked away sad. That's always interested me, because nowhere in the Gospels does anyone else, man or woman, walk away from Jesus sad. They might walk away angry, bewildered, but not sad. He could have had the kingdom, he walked away because possessions and material things were more important to him. Now, Mark finishes this section by reminding us, if you give your life to Jesus and make him first, and maybe have to give up some of these things for him, you'll never be sorry. In verse 32, Jesus makes his third prediction, or fourth, depending, about the fact that he is going to be killed, he's going to die, and on the third day, he's going to rise from the dead. Mark doesn't give us any record of any impact it had on the disciples, any questions that they might have of Jesus. He just moves on right to the next thing, verse 35, which is James and John coming to Jesus and asking Jesus if they can have the two highest position in his cabinet when he comes to his throne, or when his kingdom comes. Now, Matthew records this same instance, but says that James and John's mother is the one who brought them to Jesus, asking to have the two most important positions in his kingdom. And of course, the disciples were furious, and it says, Mark says they were indignant. They're really angry at these two disciples. Anyway, Jesus uses as an opportunity to teach his disciples that real Christian leadership revolves around servanthood, a willingness to serve others. If I've learned anything after 40 plus years of ministry, it's that the more responsibility God gives us in the kingdom, the more he expects us to serve. Chapter 10 finishes with a supernatural healing of a blind man by the name of Bartimaeus, 15 miles outside of Jerusalem. So Mark 10 ends with Jesus 15 miles outside of Jerusalem. It's a great story, a great healing, but the real message of that story is about persistence. The persistence, the reward of perseverance. What can we take away from this chapter? A lot more than I'm going to share with you, but let's just take 4 takeaways here. The first one is Jesus reminds us about the sanctity of marriage. Marriage is not a trifle thing. The church must hold marriage in high honor. Jesus brings in the Old Testament. We were created male and female. We were that the two would become one. The church is not to make excuses for divorce. We need to stand against it. Yes, there are biblical grounds for divorce, but those divorces should be rare. The second takeaway is the subtle temptation that we all face in America with materialism. The temptation of materialism. To think that our happiness, our contentment is wrapped up in how much money we make, what kind of car we drive, what kind of house we live in. For we Americans living in this culture, that's something we really got to keep in check. The third takeaway is the importance of perseverance, persistence. Now, Jesus talked a lot about being persistent. He said, keep seeking, keep knocking, keep asking. And if you do those 3 things, you're going to receive, you're going to find, and a door is going to be open. You and I can't talk about prayer. I can't teach a series on prayer without talking about the importance of persevering in prayer until the answer comes. Jesus talked a lot about the importance of being persistent. The last takeaway is about serving. We saw in Acts chapter 8 that Paul quoted Jesus, and Jesus said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." We can't separate an attitude, a willingness to have an attitude of servanthood from Christian discipleship, a willingness to serve. Now, this challenges me because it causes me to ask a question. Who am I serving? Who am I willing to serve? Who am I unwilling to serve? If you want to be a Christian disciple, you got to make a commitment to be a servant. Well, I ran out of time. Jim Dealing tomorrow will continue with chapter 11. God bless you.